Rob and Jay from Gem Radio Theater, and we are pleased to present for you the 2020 Graveyard Walk. This is the third graveyard walk at Union Cemetery, and due to COVID-19, this year's event is presented virtually online through various websites. The pandemic has created a shortage of funds for many of our not-for-profit groups. In North Creek, the Railway Depot Museum lost an entire summer of donations that they rely on for operating and building costs. To assist them, we are donating our time and talent to this year's graveyard walk and invite you to make a donation to them through the information on their website if you enjoy our tour. If you come to the cemetery to follow the tour with your device, we will begin at the Baptist Church by the big tree. Look for the path of solar lights to follow as we go along. The lighted path will be in place until the end of October 2020. Please be mindful that the graveyard is a sacred place where beloved ancestors rest. I personally think they enjoy our visits, but please step carefully and respect the graves, headstones, and gifts left by family members. Some stones are leaning or cracking, so please don't climb or push on them. Also, since we are in a pandemic, please remain socially distant from other guests who might be in the cemetery or wear your masks. Thank you, and now we will begin. I would first like to point out to you the graves of William G. and Judah Waldron. The Waldrons were among the first settlers in the town of Johnsburg, and the many stones that you see around us are their ancestors. They had many, many children, and their stones are right here, just to the front of the Union Cemetery sign. Now we'll make our way over to the big tree by the church to begin our tour. You will also see many flags and metal signs throughout the cemetery. Those were placed here mostly by Sharon and Ken Hammond to honor the veterans from the town of Johnsburg. And we'll follow the lighted path, which starts right by the Rexford stone. Over to the right, you can see the stone of Luther and Eliza Waldron. We honored them at last year's Graveyard Walk 2019, and Luther was the grandson of William G. and Judah, whose stone we just saw. The Waldrons are related to over 100 people buried here. Many of their graves are marked with a yellow flag. One of the Waldron ancestors is our first stop tonight, Keziah Dunbar Russell. And here she is.
Hello, I am Keziah Russell, the good wife to Ralph Russell, since I was 20 years of age. Ralph was 46 when we wed. Ralph and I were blessed to be mother and father to 16 children. Now, after all our earthly lives are spent, I and many of my children rest here in Union Cemetery. Ralph had wished to be buried in Old Gore Cemetery beside our wee son, Arlanzo, and his parents, Jonathan and Elizabeth Russell. Some call me Mother of the Union Cemetery because so many of our descendants rest here. Ralph departed this life in 1863 at the age of 75. 11 years before my death in 1874. And while a most terrible war raged between the North and the South, our boys, Judson and Fletcher, had joined the fight between the states in September of '63. Only a few weeks after our sons bid us goodbye, my Ralph departed his earthly life. Ralph nor myself would see our Fletcher again, for Fletcher died in January of 1865 at a military hospital in Virginia. Times being the way they were, my precious son was buried there in Virginia. We are not sure where, but we believe his resting spot is near the railway station. After the Civil War, I endured my share of sorrows, but my sorrows were far overshadowed by the joy of family. After Ralph's death, I continued on at the farm with the loving support of all my children. My last will and testament reflects the love I held in my heart for each of them. James C. Eldridge and Cassius A. Cross bore witness to the sentiments of the day that my will was drawn up. In my will, my 4 sons, Henry, Judson, William, and Charles, were remembered with equal bequest of $100. But to Elizabeth, who stayed by my side through my illness, I left $150 in a good feather bed. I also left a good feather bed to my daughter, Ellen. All my daughters, Harriet, Submit, Delinda, Anne, Sophia, Charlotte, Ellen, and Elizabeth, shared equally in my household goods. And after my gravestone was paid, all my daughters shared equally in what was left of my estate. My son, Henry Russell, and Ambrose Retford were administrators. By the way, my daughter Sophia married Hugh Robley, and their daughter Etta, born in 1866, married Walter Waldron. They becoming the great-grandparents to author Gloria Waldron Huckle. I end my visit with you today with a few words about my beginning. I have always been proud of my Dunbar and my Packard ancestral heritage. I was born in Grantham Township, New Hampshire on October of 1814. My father was Apollo Dunbar. My mother was Abigail Packard, both of them born in Massachusetts. Through them, I, and all generations who follow me, inherited a grand heritage that goes back to Plymouth Colony, to the Mayflower passengers, Richard Warren, John Alden, and Priscilla Mullins. The first of my father's ancestral Dunbar family, Robert Dunbar, was born in Scotland in 1630 and died in 1693 at Hingham, Plymouth, Massachusetts Bay Colony. His descendant, Peter Dunbar, married Sarah Thatcher, the great-granddaughter of Richard Warren, via Richard Warren's daughter, Elizabeth, who married Richard Church. The first of Abigail Packard's family to arrive were Samuel and Elizabeth. They arrived in Boston in the year of 1638. Later, a descendant, Timothy Packard, married Sarah Alden. Thank you for listening to my story. Good night, and God bless.
If you look up the hill behind Keziah, you will see a steep set of stairs leading to the highest point in the cemetery. We'll get there in a bit to see who is buried in that mausoleum. Let's follow the lighted path. Good night, Keziah.
Good night.
Over to the right, looking up the hill, you might find some stones that say Eldridge on them. The Eldridge family lived here in the town of Johnsburg long ago as some of the early settlers in the town. Glenn Pearsall wrote a historical fiction piece, and he focused on members of the Eldridge family. Following the path, down on the left, there's a big cedar tree. Behind that tree, if you take a minute and look, you will find the grave of Julius and Marie Weston. Julius was a Civil War soldier, and he was honored in the 2018 Graveyard Walk. We're going to go up Holcomb Street now to the upper part of the cemetery to visit our next honoree. Let's climb this hill. Sometimes I have to stop and catch my breath. Tonight I'm taking it nice and slow. That marks the grave of Arthur Prescott. There's also a little light there. That light marks the graves of Mildred and Arthur Prescott, who lived in Johnsburg back in the early days of skiing. Arthur is descended from the Dr. Prescott who rode with Paul Revere on his ride to warn of the British coming during the Revolutionary War. Whew. If you've been to Hudson River Trading Company in town, you may have met their granddaughter, Lori, who owns that store. All right, let's keep going. There's a little path that leads to the right by the Rob Lee stone. Some people in town say Rob Lee, and some say Rob Lee. Here we go. We're coming to our next stop, the grave of the Kenyon family. Hello there.
It's been a long time since I've presided over a meeting, so meeting with you is a great honor. I am Howard V. Kenyon. I don't know what the V stands for, but I always used it. I lived from September 1866 until January 1933. I didn't expect to die so soon, but the surgery they said I needed didn't go well, so I died. I was at St. Peter's Hospital in Albany. I had problems with my kidney for a long time. Well, let's get off that subject and talk about my life. I was born in Johnsburg to Nathaniel Kenyon and Betsy R. Rexford Kenyon. I had two brothers, Thomas, who was 3 years older than me, and Rexford, who was 11 years younger. They both moved to Minneapolis, Minnesota, Thomas in 1882 and Rexford about 1895. They were both remarkably successful. Thomas was a patent medicines manufacturer developing Condon's Catarrhal Jelly, and Rexford became manager of the company. Condon's Catarrhal Jelly was used to prevent colds and nose problems. The ads read, "You brushed your teeth. Did you clear your head?" Well, my parents taught me and my brothers about hard work and determination. As soon as I was out of school, I got busy. I became interested in real estate, county and town government, and business. I joined the Democratic Party. In 1897, I was a pathmaster in the town and worked on improving roads. 1894, I was a county officer. The same year, 1897, I purchased the stock goods of P. Moynihan in North Creek near the tannery property along the mill pond. I continued the business stand there and I ran the lumber store. My ads read, "Direct from the forest comes the lumber in our yards, ensuring you the first grade in whatever you may need." It also enables us to quote lower prices because our cost is less than if we were to buy from indirect sources. H.V. Kenyon, North Creek, New York. I admit it, I did have some fun now and then. I spent the summer of 1890 at Blue Mountain Lake. I was a member of the Moose Potawacho tribe of red men of North Creek. We had annual balls and I was on the committee at least 1 year, 1896, to make the arrangement. It was a great time for all. Time was flying by though. I was working and building my business and dabbling in politics, working for the town and looking for new opportunities. I was 34 years old in 1900 and living with my parents. In 1902, that changed when I married Bertha E. Hewitt. She was 11 years younger than me, but a perfect partner as a wife and in business. We ran our store and lumber business and invested in real estate. In 1903, I decided to run for town supervisor, and I won. During 1904 and 1905, I was busy with the town and was appointed one of 3 appraisers at a bankruptcy hearing. And my name was drawn as a juror in the gruesome Silverman murder case. In January 11th, 1905, I was appointed, along with Maurice Hoops, Samuel Prine's son-in-law, as a director for the Merchants National Bank. The announcement in the Post-Star referred to me as probably the most successful merchant in his locality and supervisor of the town of Johnsburg. In October, I submitted my name as a candidate for a second term as supervisor. I didn't win a second term, but that was just as well, as I had a lot going on. My mother died in November that year. 1906 came, and Merchants National Bank reappointed me as a director. I was a director for a few years. Oh, did I tell you? I was also a member of the Oddfellows, the Masons, and the Adirondack Lumbermen's Association. And don't forget the Red Men. In 1916, President Wilson appointed me postmaster of North Creek. I remained postmaster about 5 years. Back then, this was a political appointment. During these years, a lot was changing in the town. Adirondack Power and Light and New York Telephone were making vast improvements in running lines, buying rights of way, etc. Water supply was still an issue. In 1907, my friend and neighbor Charles S. Wood and I decided to install a plant to furnish water to our residences. We sunk a well and erected a reservoir and a windmill pump and laid a pipeline. We recorded our written agreement with Warren County. In 1914, Charles and I decided to build 2 concrete barns. Richard Robley did the work for us. My father had died in 1913, and Bertha and I were busy with the business and investing in real estate. We owned, or should I say Bertha owned, 100 acres right over there in what they now call Holcomville, and the flats across the street from the school. She also owned the property along the road to Minerva where the store was. I was busy with other responsibilities, such as being postmaster on the board of the North Creek National Bank, along with the organizations I mentioned before. We didn't have any children, so I guess this gave us more time for business. Bertha's nephew, Charles S. Hewitt, lived with us in 1915 when he was 11. We also had a domestic servant, Jenny Tripp, living there then. In 1907, I tried my hand at garnet mining on Humphrey Mountain. I had a gang of men working for me there for a while. This probably wasn't my best investment. By 1920, I was 54 years old, still very busy. Bertha and I had a hunting camp on the Boreas River where we got away for a rest now and then. In June 1923, my name was listed in a book, America's Lumberman. That was quite an honor. My blood boiled in 1928 when the state decided to replace the bridge across the Hudson River to Chestertown. They were going to take some of my property, which would restrict access to one side. They offered me $300. I took them to court. My property was worth a lot more than $300. In the end, in October 1929, which was the beginning of what people later called the Great Depression, we settled for $1,500. 1930 came around and I was elected president of the North Creek National Bank. and in 1931 was elected president of the Adirondack Lumbermen's Association. I was now in my 60s and my kidneys were giving me trouble. When I was 64, in May 1931, my brother Thomas and his wife came home from Minneapolis for a visit. We were guests of our old friend and his wife, Dr. and Mrs. J.J. Montgomery in Luzerne. It had been 50 years since Thomas and Dr. Montgomery were students at the Select School in Johnsburg, taught by John N. Armstrong. Thomas had become a wealthy and prominent citizen of Minneapolis. Their teacher, Mr. Armstrong, was still living as a retired minister in Middle Falls. Time was winding down for me. As I told you when we first met, I died in 1933. I was still active with my business ventures, real estate, presidencies of the North Creek National Bank and the Adirondack Lumbermen's Association. Bertha and I enjoyed what time we could together, mostly working, but still together. Oh yes, I didn't tell you, I was chairman of the North Creek Fire District Commission since it was organized around 1930. On December 1st, 1932, I entered St. Peter's Hospital in Albany. I was starting to feel better, and the doctors decided they could do the surgery. So on Saturday, January 7th, 1933, they performed the surgery, but I didn't make it. Masonic funeral services were held for me. I imagine they were well attended. Bertha inherited most of my estate, and she managed it well for years after. Well, it's been a pleasure to tell you my story. Thank you for joining me here tonight.
Thank you, Howard. All right, let's follow the path over to the mausoleum at the very, very top of the cemetery. Inside the mausoleum rests a woman who lived by her own rules back when a woman's expected place was to stay home in the kitchen. Let's see if Melissa Ordway is here tonight. It says Mary Persons. There's a story there. Melissa? Melissa? It looks like we missed her tonight. But she did leave her whiskey and cigar, so she must have just left. Probably to go back inside and go to bed. So if you want to meet Melissa, come back to the graveyard walk next year, and she's sure to be here. Good night, Melissa. And around the cemetery. There's the Maccabee stone. I am fascinated by that one. On one side, it says Maccabee, and on the other side, it says Russell. I know there's a story there, and we will tell it one of these times. Here we go. We're going by the McLaughlin stone and the Mostyn stone. And here are the Wades. And here at the corner is the Higgins stone. Behind the Higgins stone, you will see the stone of the Straight family. Ben Straight with his 2 wives. And Ben had a brother named George Straight, and they were both early hotel keepers in the town of Johnsburg. George's stone is along this road back on the other side of Melissa, if you'd like to go back and take a look at that. Here we go. We're going to cross over straight down across the road that goes back to the church. And here's the Ross stone and Stanley to the right. Over on the left is a Woodward stone. Up here you see lots of flags and metal markers for our veterans from the town of Johnsburg. We honor them all for their service to the country. Right here between the Clark stone and the Cole stone Our lighted path heads down. And I'd like to take a quick little pause and point out, if you look over to your left, you'll see the stone of Private Robert Sabattis. Robert died in 1944 from wounds suffered in World War II at the age of 27, meeting his new daughter Roberta just a few days before he passed away. Last year, that daughter, Roberta, came to North Creek from Schenectady to hear Robert's story. Roberta said she felt her father's spirit in the cemetery that night. It was a deeply moving time, and that is why we do the graveyard walk. Let's follow the path. Our next stop is with another World War II veteran. These two soldiers served in different parts of the world, and the war touched them in different ways. Look for the purple and red flowers to find the Minder family plot. Hello there.
Hi, I'm Joe Minder. I lived most of my life right here in North Creek. I don't always like to talk about the past, but I'll tell you about my story today. I was born in North River on May 5th, 1917. My parents, Joseph and Anna Kaufman Minder, immigrated to this area from Germany after my dad's second cousin sent for them with money he earned working at the Hooper mine. That cousin was a wrangler. Some of the wranglers still live in these parts. Anyway, my father took a job there at the Hooper mine. I remember when we were kids, my brothers George and Bill and I would sled all the way down the mountain, almost to the Hudson River. That was a long ride, let me tell you. Then we would hitch our sleds to the garnet wagons, get towed back up, and do it all again. I loved being a kid, and when I got older, I loved being around children. They make you feel young again, don't they? And they pretty much like everything too, until they reach a certain age, that is. The local kids used to come over to my place and garden with me. My son Jack said I was a bit of a Pied Piper. Without the bad part, though. I had 3 sisters, too. Helen, Josephine, and Liz. Helen worked at the North Creek Post Office for 17 years. Josephine was the French teacher at North Creek High School, and Liz moved to Long Island eventually. We lived in North River on Harvey Road. My son Jack lives in the house we grew up in, and that makes me very happy. My mother used to say, "Eat everything on your plate, and it will be a good day tomorrow." I don't recall her saying what would happen if we didn't eat everything on our plate, but most nights we ate it all. In later years, I would dream of good food, any food, but I'll get to that later. Well, as soon as I graduated from high school, I went to work at Barton Mines. By this time, Barton's had brought out the Hooper mine. I worked hard for the Bartons, and they were good to me in my early years and then after. I'll tell you about what happened in between. I don't like to talk about it, but since you came to hear my story, here it is. On May 15th, 1941, I was drafted into the U.S. Army right after my 24th birthday. I didn't know what to expect, but I knew I would do my best to protect and serve my country. I was young and strong and ready. I started keeping a sort of diary on the first day, and it started something like this. My friend Dick Villeneuve came with me to catch the bus in Warrensburg so he could drive my car home, my 1940 Chevy. The first few weeks were pretty sweet. Meeting new friends, drinking lots of beer, seeing the country for the first time. After basic training at Fort Leonard, Missouri, I was assigned to the 803rd AVN Engineers. Our main job was to build airstrips. After training in Springfield, Mass., we traveled across the country to California to wait for transportation to the Philippines. I had some time to travel around the West Coast. My buddy and I got busted for overstaying our pass to San Francisco on October 3rd. The upside was listening to a World Series game in a bar. On November 3rd, we arrived at Camp O'Donnell in the Philippines and got to work building our camp in the jungle. That was hard work. On December 8th, we got word about the attack on Pearl Harbor. We were at war with Japan. During dinner that day, we heard Jap bombers fly over our fields on their way to Clark Airfield. They destroyed much of our equipment there, as well as many planes. I was put on machine gun, but no planes came low enough for me to shoot, that day anyway. We prepared to move our remaining equipment deeper into the jungle, but the Japs left our camp alone until late December. We were lucky. We could hear the bombs going off not far away. As the Japanese forces moved in on us, we were forced to move several times to construct new emergency airfields. On December 31st, we were bombed directly for the first time. The war was finally right on top of us. The Japs were close on our heels and captured every field that we built, shooting and bombing all the while. We fought hard, but many were killed, including my close friends Robert, Roy, and Kenny. I thanked God they were killed instantly and didn't suffer like so many others. We fought the enemy and held on, God knows how, until May 6, 1942, the day after my 25th birthday. The day before my birthday, May 4th, my clothes were literally blown up and off me by a Jap shell. My canteen here took a hit, as you can see. If it had been blown the other way, I might have been killed by the metal. As it was, I hammered it back into shape and patched the hole. I put some tar on it there. This canteen came to represent for me life, food and water and hope. I kept it with me for the rest of my time in the Army. Now it is the treasured possession of my son, Jack. So back to my story. We had retreated to the island of Corregidor in Manila Bay when things got intense on the Bataan Peninsula. On May 6, 1942, we were forced to surrender to the Japanese Army. That was an extra sad day for me. Two more of my close buddies, Drake and Bailey, were killed. We were prisoners of war now, and we were forced to bury our dead American brothers. I can't begin to explain to you how awful that was. The sights, the smells, the flies. But that was just the beginning. What I experienced after our surrender was a nightmare that many others did not survive. There was little food and water, no sanitation, dirt and disease and death each and every day. The food was minimal with little or no nutrition until our captors realized that if we were to work for them, we needed to eat. Then we received small amounts of meat or beans from time to time. It was never enough, but for many of us, it was enough just to stay alive. I remember Christmas Eve 1942. We prisoners held a midnight mass outdoors. We constructed an altar and made do with odds and ends. The moon and stars shined down on us as we prayed. I'll never forget that night. 1943 was a blur of work, lack of food and clothing, and brutal treatment from our captors. We were able to forge some connections with the Filipinos to trade for food and clothing. That was done at great risk, but letters from home and packages from the Red Cross helped boost our spirits. On Christmas Day, I got a new pair of shoes. Mine were long gone, so that was a special treat. A new level of misery came our way on October 1944, when 741 of us were packed into the hold of a small coal cargo ship to be sent to Japan via China. We spent 39 days in hell packed in that ship, with many men sick or dying. Our greatest fear was getting bombed or torpedoed by our own American forces. My buddy Carl died in my arms on October 16th. His worries were over. 38 men died on that trip. The rest of us looked like walking skeletons. I worried constantly about my brothers George and Bill. After a few weeks at a camp in China, we were shipped to Japan to work at an open copper mine in February. There was 4 feet of snow and bitter cold. The change in environment from hot jungle to freezing cold without proper clothing took a toll on even more men. Our diet mostly consisted of soup made with fish and horse bones with an occasional small bowl of barley. The mine was a dangerous place to work. I worked 4 stories down at the bottom. It was more dangerous, but the digging was a bit easier. We would get word on the progress of the war from time to time when new prisoners came in. The Australians especially brought some light, as well as strength, to the prison camp. We started having air raids. The guards were quiet. Things were changing. On August 16, 1945, peace rumors were passed around the camp, and then on August 20th, the end of the war was officially announced. Our camp tailor worked all night to make an American flag. The blue came from a GI bag, the red from a Jap comforter, and the white from an Australian bedsheet. When I came out of the barracks and saw those beautiful colors for the first time, I felt like crying. Things immediately got better for us. More food and clothing, which had been received 5 months prior, but not distributed. American planes started flying over, and we made big PW signs, hoping that they'd be seen. They were, and on August 28th, we received the first of many supply drops with candy, gum, coffee, cigarettes, canned food, clothing, newspapers, everything we'd ever been craving. The nightmare was over. Oh, it took a while to get back to North Creek, but that was okay. I savored every sip and bite of American food, the sight of every pretty girl, movies, live shows, all of it. I enjoyed every minute of the train ride back across the country to get home. I was told later that my family all thought I had died along with the other thousands of our boys, all but my mother, who passed away before I got home. She told them, "Wherever my Joe is, I know he's alive." I was changed by my time as a prisoner of war. Physically, you could see the difference. I spent lots of time in the hospital in Albany and had to go back from time to time. My physical strength was greatly diminished, but Barton Mines took me right back. And I worked there until my retirement in 1987. The Bartons were very good to me, and we became good friends. I married my girl, Hazel Allen, in December 1948. We bought a house on the flats in North Creek down by the airstrip. Funny, I spent so much time building airstrips in the Army, and I ended up living by one. We raised 2 fine boys, Bob and Jack. I had to move around a lot to keep my back from setting up, so we kept busy. I skied up until I was 80 years old. I hiked, fished, gardened, and hunted. I enjoyed all of it. I bagged an 11-point deer up at Barton's, and my friends talked me into having it mounted. That also is in Jack's house. If you ask him, he'll show it to you, and he'll tell you the story. My sons Bob and Jack and I spent many hours together outdoors. There's a little pond in North River where we would go to fish for speckled trout. That was a special place for me. I had a lot of thinking to do. People wonder, how do you survive something so terrible and come out the other side? I think maybe for me, it may have been my faith, my will to live, my mother's belief in me, or just luck. Whatever it was, while I suffered greatly during the war, I didn't let it change who I was inside, and I was thankful to come home to my loved ones. I learned that each day is a gift, to appreciate the little things like food, water, and shoes, to respect your loved ones, and teach children that you can while you are here. I have children and grandchildren that I'm immensely proud of, and I know that they are proud of me. Hazel and I had a simple, good life together until I passed away on April 2nd, 2006. I've been honored in many ways for my experience as a prisoner of war, but I'm even more grateful for the love of my family and friends, and for life itself and all it brings and all we bring to it. I wish you all a good life, and God bless you. Good night.
Thank you, Joe. Lights down to the lower left corner of the cemetery to the free burn plot. This is a very, very large stone, and you can see that this family had a lot of children. And here's their mother to tell us her story. Hello there.
Hello. I've come back for a short spell so that I can tell you all about my life here on Earth. I came into this world on a warm summer's day, July 19th, 1884. It wasn't until I was old enough to understand that Mother told me all about it. It seems as though my own mother, Mary Elizabeth Straight, had died suddenly when I was only 6 weeks old. Mother said she learned about me and my father's predicament while she was working in a logging camp, and she left there right away to adopt me, and she raised me as her own, along with her daughter Etta and her son Richard. So that is how I became the daughter of Sophia and Hugh Robley. Our life was that of a typical family. I went to school just down the road. We raised a garden and kept animals on our farm, which was just south of here. The farm that had belonged to William G. and Judah Waldreth, and it was passed down in the family. You may have heard about them. Sadly, Father died while I was still young. Then, Mother remarried and life went on. Years later, I was the young, happy woman being courted by a handsome young man named Henry Freeburg. Henry used to ride his bike all the way down from North River just to see me. Why, I remember one time he hit something and flew over those handlebars on the bike. He lost 2 front teeth in that incident. But that's all right, because he got 2 gold ones to replace them. We got married on October 17, 1906, and honeymooned in Riparius. Soon our family began to grow. Our first, Loretta, was born on October 5, 1907. Then Louise in 1909. Some of you may have had both, or maybe one, as your teacher. They both taught for many, many years. After Loretta and Louise, we had Hugh and Hartsley while we lived at North River. Henry, or Hank as we called him, Agnes, Carson, who we called Tunk, Mary, Jane, Anne, Jay, who was our little junior, and Jean were born in North Creek at the family homestead where we moved after Mother passed away. 6 boys and 6 girls. We were pretty busy raising food and taking care of the animals. When Henry worked at Hooper's Mines, he would walk up there on a Sunday evening and walk back Friday after work. Doc Fitzgerald said he never saw a man that could walk like my Henry. When the children finished with their chores in the summer, they kept themselves busy playing in the fields and jumping in the hay in the big barn out back. A nice swim in the creek was always enjoyed too. In the winter, you would find them tobogganing down the big hill out in back of the barn, or sliding down those skipjacks that they made. All the children in the neighborhood were around, so there was never a dull moment. Hank even made himself a camp up in the woods a ways, and the boys liked to camp there in the summer. Many of the older boys from town enjoyed the square dances in Stony Creek on a Saturday night. I remember that's where Tunk met his wife, Jean. Things changed when World War II broke out. In 1944, my boys, Hank, Tunk, and Hartsley, were all in the service. Hank got drafted in March of '44 and left behind his wife Marion and a 2-year-old boy to go and serve in Germany. Tunk had been drafted back in '42. He left behind his wife, Jean, and a little boy. First, he was a military police officer, but he asked for a transfer to the 10th Mountain Division, a ski troop. And Hartsley, who was drafted in '41, was sent to Hawaii to wait for orders. Junior was not far behind. Our world was shattered when we learned that on November 7th, '44, our boy Hank had been killed in Germany just 6 weeks after he got there. I thought my heart would break. He was the first from this town to be lost in that dreadful war. They let Tunk come home for a short leave, and we had an early Christmas with him. Little did I know it would be the last time that we would see him. He went back to his division in Italy, and hardly any time went by that we got the terrible news that Tunk had been killed in Italy on April 19th of '45. My hair turned white overnight. I couldn't bear the thought of losing any more of my boys. Loretta wrote letters to the government for me and convinced them that no more freeborn boys should be sent abroad. They put a monument down the hill to honor all of those who had died. Life settled down eventually, but it was never the same. We have had many happy times through the years with our children and grandchildren. 1956, Henry and I celebrated our 50th wedding anniversary with a beautiful cake. All of our children and 16 of our grandchildren were here to celebrate with us. It was always such a happy place when there were children around. Life got quieter then, and Henry and I enjoyed being together for whatever time we had left. In January of 1967, Loretta got sick and passed away in just a short time. A mother never gets used to losing her children, and I am no different. But I knew that my time on earth would soon be finished, and I had served my purpose. So now I must leave you and rejoin my Henry and my sons and my daughters till eternity. Good night.
There's a little bit of a hill here where the lights are. And our final stop on tonight's tour is with a gentle spirit who was a special friend to the Alexander family. So look for the Alexander plots and then look next door and you can spot his grave by looking for the gifts that somebody has left for him.
Good evening, folks. My name is Free Burley. You can call me Free, or you can call me Burley, or you can call me Old Burley, the way folks around here used to in my later years. Just don't call me Mister. I don't like titles, and you'll get no response from me if you call me Mr. Burley. Let me just set my pack basket down. Adjust my favorite Stetson. I know you wouldn't recognize me without my Stetson. You like to hear stories, right? So let me tell you my true story. Way back in 1874, my mom was escaping a forest fire in southern Canada, where my people are from. Well, actually, they're from northern Canada, near Alaska, and folks say I look Eskimo. Maybe that's why. So in 1874, Ma was pregnant with me, and somehow she managed to get across the St. Lawrence River to get away from the fire. She gave birth to me on United States soil at Cape Vincent, and that makes me a proud American citizen. Ma made her way back to Canada with me, back to the rest of the family. Did I mention that I am the youngest of 14 children? But Ma and Pa died young, and my grandmother raised me in a teepee. She taught me the ways of the woods and the waters. When I was 7, I was ready to strike out on my own. When a lad is 7, if he's raised right, he's ready to go out on his own. Don't you all agree? I worked at a lumber camp, then made my way back to the land of my birth, to the United States of America. Yes, I've worked hard all my life, had many different jobs, even worked as a cowboy out west. And then, can you believe it? I joined the circus. I knew all about horses, so I came to North Creek as a driver of 4 horses on the cook tent with the circus. But the woods and waters were calling me. So I quit the circus and returned to the woods as a lumberjack right here in this beautiful part of the world. In spring, we'd float logs downstream to the mill, starting at ponds nestled deep in the mountains. The streams took the logs to the Hudson River, which above North River roars through a gorge of narrow rifts and long rapids. I worked the gorge during those log drives, nudging the logs out of the Blue Ledge Pool into the narrows, and I helped break the log jams at the bend. It was dangerous, cold work that crushed or drowned many a good man. In my spare time, I taught myself to read and write. Reading, one of life's great pleasures. My favorite was Walt Whitman, who, like myself, had no formal schooling. And then, as luck would have it, I was hired as a guide at 13th Lake Lodge on a hill overlooking that beautiful lake. Now, I am not usually a proud fella, but I sure am proud of my #1 guide license. I guess I was hired for my strength, my strong shoulders, and my knowledge of plants, animals, and fish. Did you know that pine pitch and beeswax can be used to heal cuts and draw out infection? Those city folks who visited Ben Strait's fine hotel sure needed help in learning how to catch a fish or down a deer. The fish were large in those days, with lake trout over 14 pounds and rainbow over 9. My job was to manage the camp, cook, help city folk catch fish, make a fire at night, play my harmonica, sing some tunes, and tell stories. Can you feel the joy of it? The song of the thrush, the cry of the loon, that piney smell, the quiet and the dark. I was a lucky man. After I stopped guiding, I worked building the North Creek to Weavertown Road. That job paid me $16 a month. And then I worked as a caretaker at Hall's Camp in North Creek until tragedy struck. In April 1954, I don't know how it happened, but my cabin there burned, and all my possessions and I burned too. The wood stove exploded, and my face and upper body were badly injured. I was in my 80s, but I managed to crawl in agony 2 miles to the road to get help. Then it was 3 months in the hospital, and then a nursing home in Glens Falls. The folks around here are a generous bunch, for sure. This community saved me. The Halls took good care of me after the fire, and then those generous Alexanders treated me like family and let me stay in a cabin they owned overlooking the Hudson River. By 1958, my big shoulders were so sore from the fire that I could no longer carry my precious pack basket. The fire had damaged my eyes, so I could no longer read. My ticker was giving out, so I knew the end was near. I started giving away my remaining possessions. When I didn't show up for church one Sunday, the pastor and a neighbor came to check on me and found me dead in my neat little cabin. I'd like to say good night to you all on a tender note with a few words from Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass that had special meaning for me. I bequeath myself to the dirt to grow from the grass I love. If you want me again, look for me under your boot soles. You will hardly know who I am or what I mean, but I shall be good health to you nevertheless, and filter and fiber your blood. Failure to fetch me at first, keep encouraged. Missing one place, search another. I stopped somewhere waiting for you. Thank you and good night.
Free. All right, let's follow the path along the fence here. Back to the road that goes down to the church. There are some interesting stones right here from the Klippel family and the Baruti family. There's some history with the Baruti family in the early days of Johnsburg. And here we are at the road. If you look up the road, you may spot the grave stone of Enos Putnam. I've marked it with a light. This Enos Putnam is the great-great-grandson of an abolitionist preacher also named Enos Putnam, who had a stop on the Underground Railroad over in the hamlet of Johnsburg. This Enos Putnam has a daughter, Phyllis Montaigne, who still lives over in Newcomb. This family is also connected with Jean Robert Foster, who you may have heard of. Well, we're almost back to the Baptist Church, and this concludes our tour for tonight. Thank you for visiting our websites, our cemetery, and our town. You may find more information about the people I mentioned at the Johnsburg Library. Johnsburg also has several other historical cemeteries you may want to visit. You can also check out the Johnsburg Historical Society's website for information. As always, we thank our Town of Johnsburg leaders for supporting events that enhance the culture of our town. Thank you again. We hope you are well, and we hope to see you in person at next year's event. Good night.